Hey guys, welcome back! So, picking up where we left off in the last episode, LucasFilm Games, later known as LucasArts, was one of my favorite developers and publishers since its early years. This is their story. After licensing the rights of Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back to Parker Brothers, George Lucas was excited to expand into other areas of entertainment, and video games was the obvious choice. So in the spring of 1982, Atari offered $1 million to Lucasfilm to create their own games group, grabbing also the rights for developing games based on the Star Wars movie franchise, which would last till early 90s. Therefore, by May 1st of 1982, George Lucas founded Lucasfilm Games, next door with special effects division Industrial Light and Magic, as part of his own Lucasfilm movie company. Peter Langston was seen as a Unix guru inside the computer division at Lucasfilm, and was the obvious choice to add the brand new games division. The entire division was more into technology than video games, and their work on the entertaining aspects of technology was seen as research and development. The first year saw a straight collaboration with Atari, from where came in 1984 Ball Blazer and the Rescue on Fractalus. Sadly, beta versions of these games ended up leaking to pirate hands and circulated for months before the original release date, having a huge impact on sales. This slight hiccup affected the commercial relations between Lucasfilm and Atari, shaking the publishing agreement between both companies. By that time, Atari was also going through a profound crisis that dragged the US video game industry into the abyss, mainly because of the infamous $25 million investment in the rights to E.T. Home cartridge systems and cartridge games were in the bargain bin, so for Atari, there was any compelling reason to publish these games. The computer game industry was caught in the confusion of the cartridge crash, but even so, the major disc-based software publishers managed to survive. Credited as Lucasfilm's first title, Ball Blazer featured a musical score which reacted to the visual action on screen, an algorithmically generated technique designed by Peter Langston that was such a huge leap forward in technology, leaving all the surviving video game industry speechless. As for Rescue on Fractalus, it was highly inspired by the Star Wars movies, with the use of 3D fractal techniques, from where the name comes from, and had the power to frighten players way before the horror genre was a normal thing in the video game industry. There was no fire button in the original version of the game, but when George Lucas came down to Lucasfilm Games' office, the first thing he asked for was a fire button. And the aliens jumping to our craft's windshield was also George's idea. George Lucas didn't have much interest in video games and barely showed up at the Skywalker Ranch. But when he did, he would transmit confidence to the teams behind Lucasfilm titles, giving just the necessary feedback. 1985 saw the release of another science fiction title, Coroni's Rift, followed by the Eidolon, a first-person fantasy RPG that also introduced scaling and depth to the environments. Then came the time for Habitats, inspired by Werner Vinge's novel True Names, that somewhat started the MMORPG genre back in 1986 with a beta test using the Quantum Link online service for the Commodore 64, available in the US and Canada, later rebranded to America Online. 1986 was also the year for Lucasfilm's first venture into the simulation video games. PHM Pegasus was a ship simulator that went on to selling more than 100,000 copies, and soon followed by Strike Fleet in 1987 with a more strategic style of approach. But still, prior to this last one, came in 1986 Lucasfilm's first adventure game and first licensed title, Labyrinth, based on Jim Henson's movie of the same name and starred by David Bowie. It had this mixed text and graphical style of gameplay that separated the real-world initial setting from the colorful fantasy adventure that eagerly awaited the player. Until 1987, Lucasfilm developed their games, and the distribution was, as told, in the hands of Atari, in this particular case, for their own systems. Activision, Epix, and Electronic Arts were also Lucasfilm's publishing partners for the home computer versions. So by October of 1987 came Maniac Mansion, Lucasfilm's first venture into the lucrative and growing business of video game publishing, and the title that gave Lucasfilm Games that extra boost of popularity, placing them on the map. Ron Gilbert's laziness was what originated the SCUM interface, firstly introduced in Maniac Mansion. It had this revolutionary ability to switch between characters so that we could solve various types of puzzles. Maniac Mansion was a commercial success and was soon followed by another great graphic adventure, Zack McCracken's and the Alien Mindbenders, in late 1988, with an upgraded SCUM interface, and also introducing Steve Purcell as the responsible for its cover art and for future Lucasfilm and LucasArts releases. Still in 1988, the first Lucasfilm flight simulator was made available, Battlehawks 1942, set in the Pacific region, and the first of a trilogy of World War II flight simulators that would have a sequel a year later by the name Their Finest Hour, centered around the Battle of Britain and featuring a bunch of unique characteristics that really set the game apart from all other available by then. Lucasfilm Games had found its own way into the industry with the point-and-click graphic adventure genre that was revealing so popular by the end of the 80s that was perfectly obvious that the man in the hat would also jump on board that carriage. The movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was a huge commercial success, and to be able to embrace all video game systems available by then, an action game was developed alongside the graphic adventure. A curious fact was that Indy could not look exactly like Harrison Ford, cause the creative team, composed by Ron Gilbert, David Fox, Steve Purcell and Noah Falstein, didn't have the rights to the actor's image. The graphic adventure of The Last Crusade ended up being the first Lucasfilm title to sell more than 250,000 units, and also had an FM Towns Japanese release on CD that included an exclusive CD-quality soundtrack. As you know, the FM Towns was one of the first computers to use a CD-ROM drive. A single-speed CD-ROM drive. Yeah. Pipe Mania was also released in this time period. It was initially developed by the assembly line for the Amiga and a year later ported by Lucasfilm Games to a bunch other systems, being also renamed to Pipe Dream. It's a brilliant and addictive puzzle game in where we simply have to connect a certain number of pipe pieces for that the liquid passes through without spilling out. 1990 came along with Loom, another point-and-click graphic adventure with a unique musical interface that was even advertised on yet another Lucasfilm graphic adventure. In fact, one of the most fondly remembered and hilarious titles from Lucasfilm Games, The Secret of Monkey Island. I invite you all to check my video that celebrates the 25 years of The Secret of Monkey Island, packed with interesting facts that surround its development. Along with The Secret of Monkey Island came an action game by the name of Night Shift, in where we played the role of a worker in a factory owned by industrial Might and Logic. Yeah, that's right, Might and Logic, and we must ensure that the factory is working properly. It was also in 1990 that a reorganization of the Lucas companies took place, and thus LucasFilm Games became part of the LucasArts Entertainment Company, along with Industrial Light and Magic and Skywalker Sound. Later, Industrial Light and Magic would merge with Skywalker Sound into Lucas Digital Limited, and LucasArts, the official and final name of the games division. They moved to newer and bigger facilities and also started publishing their own gaming magazine, The Adventurer, that would feature announcements of their upcoming titles and interviews with the developers, and would be around till 1996. 1991 came along, and with it, the third of LucasFilm Games' Flight Simulator series, only available for DOS machines. Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe, more focused on action than on simulation, that depicts the more advanced German aircraft technology against the Allied obsolete fleet during World War II. Also in 1991, and for the first time, the license to develop video games based on the Star Wars movie franchise was finally in the hands of its rightful owner. So, based on the first two movies of the Star Wars franchise, came two titles for Sega and Nintendo 8-bit systems: Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. This last one was exclusive to the NES and the Game Boy. If it wasn't for a license for development of video games based in the Star Wars universe being in the hands of Atari during the 80s, we would probably never see amazing, original and groundbreaking titles like Ballblazer, Rescue on Fractalus, Labyrinth, Maniac Mansion, Zack McCracken, The Secret of Monkey Island, etc. So guys, this wraps up the story of LucasFilm Games. In the next episode we'll be taking a look at LucasArts, its best and worst moments, picking up where we left off in 1991, till the acquirement by Disney of its parent company Lucasfilm in 2012. If you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to like, to share, to comment and to subscribe to It's a Pixelthing. Keep up with my related episodes just by clicking on these examples, other great developers and publishers that left their important mark in video gaming history. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next episode.